And we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of A Bookish Moment. I am Sarah Burr, author of the brand new novel Over My Dead blog.
And I am Shea Cangany, author of the upcoming novel Panic in the Panhandle. And that will be out next September. We'll be talking about that maybe once or twice between now and then. Today, we have a very special guest. Sarah and I are thrilled to welcome a local expert in graphic novels and comics in general. Shea Cangany is the manager of the Comic Carnival, a comic book store located here in Indianapolis, founded in 1975. It's one of the oldest comic book stores, not only here in the Midwest, but throughout the country. So Shea is going to tell us, give us a little primer about graphic novels because, Sarah and I both love them and we love writing in general. So Shea, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. Yeah. Thanks for having me, JC. I'm just glad. I'm just glad to be here. Honestly, I've been a fan of the show for a while, and so it's great to be here. I am currently the manager of the oldest comic book shop in the Midwest. Definitely the oldest one in Indianapolis and probably Indiana as a whole. Comic Carnival, and I've been there for about 2 years. I will say I've learned a lot in my time there. But it's been a real pleasure, honestly, getting to know everybody and working in the community. It's been a real thrill.
Well, cool.
That's
well, yeah,
exciting.
we are very happy to have you here and that leads us right into the first question that I have for you is we're here to talk graphic novels. What is a graphic novel?
Yeah, so a graphic novel is basically, it's an original story that is told in a graphic medium. A graphic medium is something that's like a movie or a television show. It's got pictures and words. The difference with a graphic novel versus like just a comic book is a graphic novel is usually an original story told over a certain length of pages. So you could have a couple comic books, but that would just be a single comic versus a graphic novel is 100, 150 pages. It's the size of like a small novella, or maybe even, depending on how big you want to get, full novel length, like 300 pages possibly.
Okay.
So when it comes to the graphic novel, and I'm thinking about when I really was first introduced to them and knew that they were a form of storytelling. And it was a book that I actually had to read for I think it was a nonfiction writing class in college. And it was Persepolis, which was a memoir about a young girl growing up in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. And I remember just finding her story so raw and riveting, told in such a format where not only are you hearing and reading her emotions, but you're seeing the pain and you're seeing the devastation that these people had to endure. So my first encounter with graphic novels was very dark, but very real and kind of opened up a whole avenue to storytelling that I didn't know was available. So Shea, I'm interested to know what your first experiences were with the graphic novel, and JC, if you have one that you remember being your first as well, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember. So I grew up loving comic books. Comic Carnival, ironically enough, was my comic book store growing up as a kid. So it was fun to come full circle and finally work for them. The coolest thing for me was my first introduction to graphic novels was really in middle school. In 6th grade, the series Bone was making the rounds, and that was and is a graphic novel, but it's a graphic novel for kids, which was kind of unheard of at the time, because while it did have comics, it was really just, it was so unique in that it was a kind of an adult medium that was being told for kids. But I don't really count that one because I didn't finish it. My first one, and what is easily my favorite, is kind of along the line of Persepolis. I forget how to say it. Gosh, is Mouse, just Maus, which is also a nonfiction biography of a Holocaust survivor done by artist and writer Art Spiegelman about his father, Vladek. And I read that at like age 13 or 14, and that was when I was like, oh, this is how you tell a story in a visual medium that is also got so much raw emotion, and it's in black and white. So it's like there's no way to, like, you have to convey everything in black and white and with symbolism. The Nazis are cats and the Jews are mice. It's kind of, it's a unique way to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
But that was my first introduction.
Yeah, that's mine was, it's interesting because my first introduction was, well, the first one that I read completely was V for Vendetta. And that's another one that, and Shea can talk a lot more about the author of V for Vendetta if you want, Shea. But that was one that was introduced to me because I'd heard of the movie, and I was talking with some folks at work, and they were saying, like, you need to, quit being a book snob and try out these graphic novel things. And they said, here, this V for Vendetta. It's really, really good, and it's a fantastic story. Shea, could you tell folks a little bit about what V for Vendetta is?
Yeah, so V for Vendetta is a graphic novel done by Alan Moore, who also did the graphic novel for Watchmen. And V is kind of the story of it's like a proto-fascist London government, and the story of our heroine, who is taken in by this character we only know as V, who wears a Guy Fawkes mask, and how he basically radicalizes her to be more of a radical socialist. It's basically it's the pinnacle of like socialism versus fascism, and that the government is being fascist and it's up to the people to be socialist.
I think
just some light reading there.
Just easy.
JC, your question kind of triggered something that I was like, as we were preparing for this episode, and Shea, you had sent me a list of graphic novels to check out. I'm looking at the list and seeing, a lot of these I'm familiar with just based on the fact that they're movies. And so, I begin to think about, the book to movie adaptations that are out there. And it seems that a lot of graphic novels really lend themselves to being made into a movie. And I'm curious if you have any insights or thoughts as to why the graphic novel itself is really kind of a building block when it comes to providing something cinematic for a viewer to experience.
So one of the big correlations between movies and television and comic books and graphic novels is the fact that you start with a script, but it's not like a book outline. It's like you have to have like motion and character movement. And so you're really screenwriting almost a comic book or graphic novel. And so if you have that natural ability, you're going to be able to translate that a bit easier into a movie. Like, let's say, and couple that with the fact that you already have an actual visual representation of the characters and the settings that you're supposed to be bringing in, as opposed to like a novel like you guys write, where it would be a lot more, a bit harder, because you leave a lot of the character and the setting up to interpretation, a little bit at least. You know, you obviously would dictate, you know, oh, somebody has red hair, somebody has a beard, so this is in London, this is in New York. But you can kind of, it still leaves it up to the imagination a bit, because like, well, what does this character's facial structure look like? Do they have kind of a rounder face? Is it a, you know, thinner face? How long is the hair if it's not dictated? And so with a visual medium like this, you have all the tools, but that doesn't always mean that it translates well because of the content that is in the story itself. A good example of non-translation well is Watchmen. Funnily enough, Watchmen being kind of like the perennial, like one of the big graphic novels. It starts as a deconstruction, and what I mean by that is like of the superhero. And what I mean by that is like it takes all that a superhero is and breaks it down to its bare bones. And then we're left with Watchmen. That doesn't work as well in a movie format versus a comic format because it's kind of poking fun at comics while being a comic itself. But then you have V, same author, and that translated incredibly well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember being blown away by the movie. So yeah, I think that's a really astute observation to make when it comes to, you know, what's being presented to the creator, especially, you know, in the movie industry. It's like, you know, you have your cast that's drawn out for you, and then, you know, finding a way to bring them to life, which is its own kind of challenge. But and before we kind of dig into another point of taking books and making them into graphic novels, I do want to give some shout outs to the folks that are joining us this afternoon here live during our show. Thank you everyone for being here. It's delightful to see some returning names and some new faces here. We've got Claudia, Farmhouse Reader, Muzan, E.M. Hart. We've got the Collins, and we've got Comic Carnival joining us. That's exciting. And so we do have some questions as well. And so Claudia is asking, are there any suggestions when it comes to lighter graphic novels? So lighter themes and maybe things that don't make us feel like, oh, the world is against us so much.
Yeah. Wow, that's actually kind of a harder question. I was not prepared for lighter ones. Because one of the interesting things is that graphic novels, by their nature, want to tell a bit of a more heavy story. If I had to think of any.
So that kind of leads me to another kind of segue, Shea. How does then the graphic novel compare to manga? Because Claudia, I could give you so many light recommendations when it comes to manga, and it's often, you know, they joke about them being light novels in anime and such. So I'm curious about the contrast that you see between those two storytelling mediums.
Yeah, so really quick, Claudia, check out Bone. Bone is a great one. It's all ages, but it's very funny. Like, please, I mentioned it earlier in the broadcast, but it is super good. As far as the differences between the two, so the very obvious, we'll address the elephant in the room first, and that's that in Japan they read from right to left, whereas we here in the States we read from left to right. So the biggest thing is that everything is mirrored. Now, I will say one of the other differences is content. Oftentimes in Japan, you have the culture is very different from here in the States. So you have a lot more different sensibilities. I mentioned that before the broadcast too. But like in Japan, you know, it would be acceptable for the leader of a superhero team to have everybody else sacrifice themselves for the good of the leader, because that's a cultural and social thing in Japan. Versus here in the States, it'd be like, you know, no man left behind kind of mentality. You know, in the Justice League, everybody's going to stay for the Justice League. But in Japan, it may be different. Couple that with the fact that manga and their creators, mangaka, do everything. Like they write and draw and ink. Versus in the States with graphic novels, you have a writer, you have a inker, you have a colorist, you have an artist, you have a letterer. It's like it's a whole team process, which innately has its strengths, but also its weaknesses, as does the Japanese format.
And that brings up a question that DHB asked, Shea. So what is the harder part, the art or the story? Because it sounds like what you're telling us, as far as graphic novels go, at least, you have different people doing different things.
As somebody who is more of just kind of an outside observer and enjoyer, but still an expert in the field, honestly, I think the hardest part is translating what the story should look like. So probably the art. But that isn't to say that the story isn't easy by any means. Because you have to make sure that the writer's vision is met, but you also want to have your own creative input as the second build person on the indicia. Like you want to be like, you want to set your own thing. Like if Captain America throws a punch and it says Captain America throws a punch, well, okay, that's great. Now it's up to me, the artist, to interpret that and make sure that that punch is not like some wild and crazy like haymaker. It's an actual Captain America punch, but I want it to have my own style too. Maybe it's a left hook or something like that.
Okay.
I could see the, from someone that knows the complexities of putting together a story. I would be really interested on your take about a graphic novel. While it delivers a full arc, you're not using as much text as you normally would, let's say, in a novel or maybe even in a novella. So I'm curious about that word selection. Like, how important is selecting the creation of your sentence? Because if you are having this lofty, long run-on sentence, like that just doesn't feel like it fits the vibe of a graphic novel. The idea is that you want to get about anything that you can't dictate into a picture, you have to put into words. So like dialogue between characters, inner monologue, those are things that you want, or if there's a narration, those are things you have to have, but you don't want it to be plotting because that's going to lose the visual format. At that point, you might as well just write a novel. I mean, it's just kind of the fact of the matter. Mm-hmm.
So one of the hardest things is, as a writer then, to be like, all right, here's my script. This is my vision. How do I envision this and make it not like, what's the word? How do I put this into a format or into a structure that makes sense, but also keeps the pace? And we talk about pacing so much in comic books and manga as well, in anime and television and movies. Pacing is so key in comic books because it's in graphic novels. It's quick. You have to have something going all the time. Otherwise, you're going to lose your reader because it's a shorter story.
And I'm just going to jump in here real quick because we've gotten a bunch of good suggestions regarding some of the lighter graphic novels. E.M. Hart. Hi, Echo. Echo's a fan and a friend. Echo recommended the Tea Dragon Society. That's one that Echo reads with Echo's daughter. And Asterisk and Obelisk is another one that DHB recommended that one. So those are a couple. So yeah. So I guess, Shea, one of the questions I've got real quick then, just to clarify, is, when Sarah and I, when we write,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much, we're just banging away on the keyboard. The process of putting the novel, the non-graphic novel together is pretty much us, as
Mhm.
far as writing the book. Then you get into all that other stuff later on where you have a team. But it really sounds like for the graphic novel and for comics, you have to have a team right from the beginning, because you have someone who's writing it, you have somebody who is, doing this and doing that. Can you talk about that dynamic a little bit? Like how it sounds like it's just that's a big undertaking to get something from, to get a graphic novel actually, turned into one of these. I know, big shock, a Star Trek graphic novel in my house.
Yeah, it really is. A lot of it, funnily enough, is at the pace of the writer. Once the writer turns in a script, that's when everything else can start. Because without a script, you get stuff like the early to mid 1960s Marvel comics, where they're great, they're fun, the art is superb, but the art was done first, and then you have to plug in the story, and that is a little backwards. They call it the Marvel method. So what you really want to do is you want to bring a team together, and if you work with somebody for a long time, like there's a couple of teams that I know in modern comics and graphic noveling that work incredibly well together. As you get to know people better, you are like, all right, I know exactly what deadline I have to make. I know what words I have to use, how to convey emotion. But a graphic novel could take a full year to make, especially if you're taking your time with it. Shout out to a couple of teams really quick. Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. They make a ton of things together. The Reckless series being a murder mystery, kind of hard-boiled case detective type series.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. There's Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen. They've done a lot of things together. And so when you work with somebody consistently, or have a team consistently working with you, you really start to understand, like, all right, I got to do this. This is how I got it. This is why I have to get it done, and how fast I have to get it done.
That brings me to a question that has actually come up a couple times when we've had our author guests, who they have told us that their books are being made into graphic novels. And so I'm curious, Shea, if you can enlighten us about, and gosh, like what you had said about, having the script to move forward. What's the process from adapting a book that someone has written all of those lengthy passages about how beautiful the field looks, or the sun rising over the dunes? What's the process of taking a novel and then converting it into something that is pared down, but also has those images to support it?
So the first step you really want to do is you want to have the original source material author and the screenwriter essentially work together as a unit. Because if you don't work together, it's going to be the screenwriter is just going to read the original source material, and they're going to do whatever the heck they want. So it helps to have creative input in something of your own creation being adapted. The first step I would think would be to just have, basically, are there any key pieces of dialogue you really like? Was there a joke you really liked? Was there a pivotal scene, like in London or in China, somebody got shot and it was like a massive turning point? It was like their Uncle Ben to their Peter Parker. Like, what is that something that has to be translated and that you really want to stick in there? So I would imagine it's first going over the massive bullet points of like, this is what we have to include. And from there, then it's like, all right, I trust the screenwriter because they've gotten my personal whatevers in there, and the screenwriter has to do their job now. And I'm not a screenwriter. I will say that I am a hobbyist novelist. So my best friend is a screenwriter, so he could tell me more about that. But it's hard because you want to have enough stuff to make sense, but you don't want to have too much that it becomes overbearing.
So are they at that point, and this is something that I guess I didn't realize, but if you are taking a book and adapting it into a graphic novel, you're not just like taking out sections of the book that's already been written. You're taking the themes and the ideas and you are creating words of your own? Or are there times where it's like, I'm just going to, take all of the dialogue and build the book around it?
You usually don't want to take the exact dialogue because that you can get into trouble with that. Because what if there's a really long soliloquy or a long monologue? That doesn't translate well. So you want to pare down a lot of it, as we've talked about. You want to basically get the skeleton, then flesh out that skeleton, and you're going to add your own words. Plus, there's no fun in reading a graphic novel that's just the dialogue of the original novel. You want to have a little bit of difference too. That is what a lot of adaptations really struggle with, is towing the line between source material and new material.
And speaking of that, I can't believe our time is almost up. This has just flown by. This has been such a great education. Shea, I guess one of the things real quick here before we go, as we're wrapping up, for our audience, let's say they're going to walk into a comic carnival, like here in Indianapolis, or a local comic store or a bookstore. What are some graphic novels that you would recommend that folks give a try?
Oh man. So I am one that I really like a lot of the darker things. I like stuff with substance, and I don't want to suspend my disbelief all the time. So the ones we mentioned so far, V for Vendetta, Watchmen, Mouse. Those are the big three graphic novels of the 80s that kind of started this whole graphic novel trend. Though there is a predecessor, though, that cannot be understated because it was written by the man whose name is used for the highest honor in comic book awards, Will Eisner. It's called A Contract with God. Very, very, very good. Highly recommend it. You can find that on Amazon currently, and there is a copy currently at the Comic Carnival here in Indianapolis. As far as that, for original material, there's a new one I like called Night Eaters by Sana Takada and Marjorie Liu, who are also the creative team behind a series called Monstrous. It's kind of like horror-esque, but with a lot of mythology behind it. Anything by Peach Momoko. That's a self-serving plug. She's my favorite artist and creator.
I'm going to throw you a bone here, by the way.
Sandman, yes, Sandman is a great series. Please read Sandman if you haven't done it. Preacher, which was an AMC series. Alan Moore's Swamp Thing. Fables. If you've played the game The Wolf Among Us, that's what Fables is based on. Or that's what Wolf Among Us is based on. Fables. Long-running comic book series. I'm a shameless Batman fan, so look up good Batman stories. Long Halloween, Hush, Saga. That's a current modern masterpiece. And my current personal favorite comic book, Something is Killing the Children. It's a horror novel, but it's very good.
That's a great list.
Yeah. We're also getting our good friends at the Comic Carnival mentioning, again, the T-Dragon Society, the Bat Pig books are great, funny, light reading, as well as Ms. Marvel, Squirrel Girl, and Miles Morales. So, and then Echo mentioned also Saga as well.
Yes. I'm grateful to have people who can back me up on a lot of these things. It's helpful.
And we also have a comment from Vicky Browning saying that they'll be showing this episode to their daughter because she is a fan of manga and has started collecting graphic novels. So,
yay! I'm so glad.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I tell you what, Shea, it's a bummer. Our time is up. Are these moments, they fly by.
These moments. They do.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us, and we really appreciate the kind of the primer on graphic novels. And I feel like we've just barely scratched the surface of what is the graphic novel. But like Sarah and I have often said, we're readers as well as authors. We're fans, and however you get your reading material is great. So maybe we can talk and possibly have you back sometime where you and Sarah can take a deep dive into the whole manga thing, since you both are big readers of that. Who knows?
I'd love to.
I think we would need like a bookish month to cover all of the manga that I have consumed in recent weeks. Such a fun way to just enjoy life by reading those books. But yes, Shea, thank you again for being here. It was great chatting with you. Thank you for sharing all of these great insights. And to our audience members, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your recommendations, for giving us your questions. We're really thrilled that you could be here live during our show. And for folks who may not yet be subscribed to our channel, make sure that you sign up so that you can stay connected with everything that we have going on. We do have a new episode of the Bookish Hour airing this week on Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to be joined by Mike Krentz talking about his medical suspense thrillers. So that's going to be a genre that we haven't touched on a lot of. So it's going to be a great show and very exciting. So again,
and I just want to say one thing. Sorry to interrupt because we got to go, but I also want to quick shout out. Comic Carnival Indie. They're on Facebook. They're on Instagram. So look them up. And they can give you some great guidance. Shea works there, so
we're all experts.
Perfect. So yes, make sure that you guys connect with Comic Carnival. And until we see you all again, stay bookish. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you for being
Thanks,
here.
everyone.
Bye.